Alrighty, folks. The Pennzoil 400 at Las Vegas is in the books. We've gotten our first real look at the the complete 2019 new rules package, air ducts and all. It didn't look tremendously different from what we saw at Atlanta. It was, it seems like they're able to pretty much run flat out. The cars don't seem to be difficult to drive at all. They are closer. There was more passing, but that's kind of to be expected. If you bunch up the field by slowing the cars down and with a combination of decreased horsepower and increased drag, and keep the grip level that you have in the tire and the footprint of the tires the same, you're going to make the field closer. And as a result of the field being closer, you're going to have more passing just by virtue of, guys kind of getting a run on another guy and then they have to check up or they miss the thing. With momentum racing, when they're all bunched up, once one guy loses his momentum, that creates a little bit of turbulence and passing opportunities within the pack for a little while. It does feel a bit forced. It's not super. What for me at least, what makes racing exciting and what makes passing exciting is the inherent risk factor. I'm not saying the danger. I'm not the thought that someone might get hurt is not what makes it interesting. When I say risk factor, I mean the potential risk to both drivers' races. If they're, when you have to put a car on the edge of its grip level in order to make a pass or to complete a pass, that's interesting because you are then testing the limits of that driver's ability. Either he is able to rise to the occasion and complete the pass. The other driver might force the other driver into an error by moving in a way that's unanticipated, and then the lead driver has to react to what the trailing driver is doing. That creates interesting opportunities. Also, watching drivers, hunt around for lines, and you saw a little bit of that with where as the tires wore out, the top line came in. But really, the reason the top line came in was it was really about getting up by that wall and just building momentum. The cars didn't. It wasn't about trying to find grip to make an ill-handling race car handle better, or to try to work around the failings of an ill-handling race car, or a car that was really on edge. And I think that's the biggest issue is that I see folks, like, the Fox commentators. I see Jim Utter on Twitter. I see a bunch of the NASCAR media cheerleading this as like, oh, look they're running closer and there's more passing. Yeah, if we put them out in Legends cars, they would run really close and there would be a lot of passing. It wouldn't be a particularly entertaining, maybe once as a gimmick. I wouldn't want to watch that week after week. It's excuse me. It's just it feels slow. Like it doesn't. It's not. And look, the what I want to say about it, I think, is that it's not necessarily super bad to watch. There was what looked to be an interesting race among the top four drivers: Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, developing late in the race that almost materialized with two teammates racing each other for the win. But you could really see that once the cars got within a certain distance of each other, it was really hard to generate a run. There were definitely things that the trailing car could do with just diving it down to the bottom and pulling a slide job, although it is a little bit different from your traditional side job. You know, the dirt track, you're driving it off the right rear and you slide up in front of the guy and then he can try to slide under you. In this one, it's just that you're using the slide is all scrubbing the right front as you slide up in front that way. The cars never really seemed unstable. I didn't, you know, I said that there was a little bit of contact and some guys getting frustrated and bumping into each other at certain points in the race. I think you had Stenhouse and Eric Jones bumping into each other, and then I think you had Stenhouse and Almirola bumping into each other. The Stenhouse seemed to be involved in a lot of stuff, and, you know, good on him. He had a good race car. He has not traditionally had a particularly competitive race car at mile and a half tracks, and now that they've made mile and a half tracks more like restrictor plate racing that you had at Daytona and Talladega, where guys like Ricky Stenhouse and Austin Dillon, the Roush teams were able to compete a little bit more. The Childress teams were able to compete a little bit more. Lo and behold, you make mile and a half racing more like restrictor plate racing, and all of a sudden the teams that are good at restrictor plate racing are now also good at mile and a half racing. It does seem a little weird that we've really just kind of changed the rules in a way that favors teams that were struggling when handling mattered more and driver ability mattered more, where the driver had more input that was required. And what I mean by that is so if you are full throttle around a track like Daytona or Talladega, and you can just hold the car at full throttle right on the bottom the entire time, the track is too big for the car to make it for the driver to be able to meaningfully impact the equation in any real way. It's not that hard to keep your foot planted on the floorboard and just turn the wheel as far as you need to go to the left to keep a steady line. That's really not that difficult, especially if you're talking about a single car run. Now, when you bunch cars up in a pack and you have to account for other vehicles that are close by you, then yeah, there's some more driver ability that comes in, and there is a different skill set that applies to restrictor plate racing and pack racing versus what would normally apply to other types of racing, where throttle control and the ability to manage the grip of the tires that are driving the race car, those are two different skill sets. And since we have been moving more in the direction of decreased horsepower, and now with the 2019 rules package, in addition to that increased aerodynamic downforce, we've really taken a lot of what the driver did behind the wheel out of the equation. The amount of time that you spend off with your foot either on the brake or at some percentage difference from 100% on the throttle, that's pretty much the amount of that's pretty much the percentage of a lap that you can say that the driver is actually making a difference. And with this package, the amount of time spent where the driver is making a difference on what is making that race car go fast has been drastically reduced. As a fan who likes watching drivers with a whole lot of ability race against one another, that is less interesting for me. Even though it did ultimately work out that as the race played out, the cream rose to the top, it didn't feel there was a difference with that. And I'm trying to phrase this in such a way that does not come across as a major slam on drivers like Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Austin Dillon and their teams, but I'm not sure that there's any real way to say it without that, which is that I guess the way that I'm saying it is I have not seen any major indication that Austin Dillon or Ricky Stenhouse Jr. are doing have learned or upgraded their skill set in any meaningful way that now makes them able to compete with the likes of a Joey Logano or a Kevin Harvick or a Martin Truex Jr. or a Kyle Busch. What I see instead is that NASCAR has altered the rules package so that the advantage that those drivers used to have over the other drivers is less. They are the advantage that they have. They are able to use that advantage less than they used to be able to do to create separation and differentiate themselves from drivers who do not have the same level of car control. Some of the racing was entertaining. It was entertaining watching the door-to-door battling between Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Eric Jones. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing to watch. I still am of the opinion that when we get to see this package in iRacing, starting with the coming week, so we as in the sim racing community get our hands on the package, it looks like a style of racing that is extremely frustrating from the driver's perspective. If you're in the lead, there doesn't seem to be anything that you can do to gap the rest of to open up a gap, which if as a fan you like that. You like that it's absolutely impossible, no matter how good the driver is, for him to break away and gap the field. Okay. So if you're in the lead, that's frustrating because you know that you can never gap. You just kind of have to manage the lead and make sure that you're not burning up your stuff trying to form a gap that won't form, and you know that the other guy might be, if you catch traffic wrong, that guy's going to be right on top of you. All right. And then the other thing is that the guys, back in the field, it's really tough to pass. We did see that. We saw that you could pass. You if you got really close, you could sort of pull off a slide job if the bottom of the track was open to you. I mean, but so on the restarts, they're all bunched up, and so they're going 3 and 4 wide because they can. But it's not super dramatic when the cars are so planted that everyone's just kind of able to hold their line and they run, and then they sort out. Like they're ranting. The announcers were ranting and raving over how great the racing was for the four or five laps after the start, restart, and final stage restart. So you had the start of stage 1, you had the restart of stage 2, and you had the final stage restart. You had 15 laps where there was a whole bunch of racing that they thought was great. It was okay. And then the field sort of got strung out, and you really did kind of have what still felt like a parade. There were more passes, but the passes felt less significant, and I would wonder how many of those passes were coming after things sorted out. And you also had a lot of passing that happened as green flag pit stops were cycling through because of the way the stages were sorted, where you had teams could run about 60 laps on fuel. You had an 80-lap stage, which meant that some teams were splitting it right down the middle, and other teams were trying to run the tank drive for a caution that just wasn't going to happen because these cars are not even close to being on the edge of grip. So the odds of, unless someone truly makes a boneheaded move and just sort of drives into another driver and creates that. Like, these cars are not close to the edge of spinning out. It's not like it used to be when I was watching back in the 90s where the announcers would talk about how you could just reach out your hand and touch the other car. Just a light touch like that would cause that car to spin out. That was cool. You know, as a kid growing up watching that and hearing the announcers talk about how these guys are like so on the edge that all it would take was a finger touching the rear quarter panel to make the car get loose and go around and crash. Like the thought that it that those guys are on that knife edge as they're driving through it, and you could visually see the cars loose and wiggle and bouncing over bumps and the suspension travel. That made what these guys were doing, the feats that these guys were achieving, compelling and interesting to watch. This, you know, it looks like something that I could do or that most average people could do, honestly. And you hear it in the way that, you know, that Kyle Busch talks about it. You know, he was obviously very disappointed because he had that speeding on entry penalty, and if not for that, he likely would have won the race, I think, because he recovered from that all the way to be just 2 seconds off of the lead. He was almost able to drive back up through the field. I don't know. I'm not loving the new package. I look forward to the Gen 7 car. I don't think that the combination of reducing horsepower and increasing drag, I think that was the dryer. I think is very much the wrong way for NASCAR to go. I just don't think that it really does take it less out of the driver's hands and it makes the cars more easy to drive. And I am getting so sick of Darrell Waltrip ranting and raving about how good the cars are driving. Yeah, they're all driving good, dude. They are all way below their grip threshold. So the drivers kind of just put their foot down and hold it and turn the wheel. And what you see a relatively level playing field. You do see that there are some teams that are able to work a little bit of an advantage in horsepower. The teams that have a little bit of better engine department seem to be really thriving with this package, and you know, and the teams that do, you know, there clearly is a difference with handling, because there are definitely some teams that hit on this on this package well and produce good results from that, and there were some teams that missed it. But yeah, it does seem to have lost something, even versus last year, which I know that a lot of people thought that a lot of the racing last year was really boring. Look, any format you have, you can produce boring racing and can produce amazing racing. The package isn't necessarily going to fix that. I think it's more important that you give a package that where the cars look like they're going fast and it looks like what the drivers are doing is impressive, regardless of how close the battle for the lead is. A close battle for the lead's awesome. That's great. I love it. But just bunching up the pack and making every track into a draft track is, I don't think, a great way to do that. So, run down through the field real quick. Joey Logano with the win. Brad Keselowski second. 1-2 for Penske. I tell you what, Penske looks impressive. They're definitely looking strong. Kyle Busch third. Probably had the fastest car. Was going for the weekend sweep. I talked about it in the pre-race show. I am getting a little bored with Kyle Busch going down and whooping up on the lower series. I don't know what the solution to that is, but look, the career, the lifetime achievement of the number of wins that he's gotten across those series is an impressive feat. But each individual race, when right now at this moment in time, when he goes down to the Truck Series and wins a truck race, I expect him to do that. I expect him to win the Xfinity Series race. If he doesn't do that, it you know it seems like he vastly underperformed versus his expectations. When he goes out and wins in the Cup Series, that's impressive because he's beating the other guys who are the best, and you can see how much more difficult it is to win in the Cup Series versus those other series. Kevin Harvick fourth, Kurt Busch fifth. Kurt Busch in that number one car, they've got something going on there. That team looks pretty good. Ganassi looks like they're the best of the Chevy teams. Ganassi looks good. Childress looks good, and then the JTG Doherty cars, when we get to them, they also continue to look pretty impressive. Hendrick still looks like they're struggling a little bit. They looked a little bit better today at times, but they're still missing something. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. in sixth. Look, that is an impressive run, and the number 17 team is more competitive. It was interesting that it didn't seem to transfer to the number 6, and I don't know all the reasons for that. But the number 17, Stenhouse, Roush is on the upswing this year, and Childress appears to be on the upswing this year, although the Childress car struggled in the race today. But those teams that were struggling before do seem to be better and more competitive with this package. The Hendrick team seems to be a little bit off, perhaps. And so, when you have teams performing better than they used to, that by definition means that other teams are going to be performing worse. Eric Almirola, 7th. Stuart Haas, looks pretty strong. Those cars are still pretty good. Not quite as good as the Penske cars, though. The Penske cars, at least in race trims, do seem to have something. They do seem to have an advantage over the Stuart Haas Fords. So the lead Ford team right now, definitely early in the season, appears to be Penske. Martin Truex Jr. in 8th. As I said in the pre-race show, him starting 23rd, and Eric Almirola as well, starting in 25th place. I thought that those were good plays. Brad Keselowski starting 19th and finishing 2nd also ended up being a good play. Obviously, Joey Logano was a good play as well with the win. There was not any one driver that went out and dominated and led a giant chunk of the race. The laps led were sort of split among several drivers, although Kevin Harvick and Joey Logano got the lion's share of that. Chase Elliott 9th, the best of the Hendrick cars, Denny Hamlin in 10th. That rounds out the top 10. Alex Bowman 11th. It's a good run, but at the same time, Alex Bowman in that 88 car, I think, when he came into that it looked like, especially when he ran so well at Phoenix and nearly won that race in relief of Dale Earnhardt Jr., it looked like that was going to be a lot of us were expecting Alex Bowman to go out and compete for wins. He hasn't done that really since moving into the 88, but 11th place finish for him in this one. Kyle Larson in 12th. Just, they had that speeding penalty. They recovered not as well, or they had a penalty for too many men over the wall. There were two penalties where it was too many went over a wall because a pit crew member touched his hand to the pavement, which looked like a bit of a ticky-tack call, but that's the rule. And I think it was Jeff Gordon who said in the booth, it's like, yeah, it feels like a ticky-tack call, but at the same time, there's no reason for that to be happening during a pit stop. And if you know the rule, then that shouldn't be happening. So it was interesting. Both the 42 of Kyle Larson and the 3 of Austin Dillon got tagged for that. Kyle Larson was able to recover again because of the stages. Some guys were able to get their laps back and recover from those penalties and get a shot with the caution bunch in the field back up. So Larson was able to recover from that. Eric Jones finishing 13th was looking pretty good at some points. Clint Boyer finishing 14th. You know, we're starting to get into sort of like these are okay runs. Paul Menard 15th, William Byron 16th, led for a little bit, made an interesting strategy call that seemed to work and get him a stage point at the end of stage 2. But at the end of the day, not even finishing inside the top 15. That's disappointing for these Hendrick teams. The 9th, 11th, 16th, and 19th for Jimmy Johnson. That's not a great day for Hendrick. Maybe a slight step forward, but that's not the type of performance we're used to seeing out of the Hendrick stable. Jimmy Johnson, the 4th of the Hendrick drivers. I keep saying a package that is designed to be tighter and drive more off the right front than off the right rear is not going to play to Jimmy Johnson's strengths. That has been bearing out at least the first 2 weeks that we've seen it at Atlanta and Las Vegas. Daniel Suarez in 17th. I still continue to be a believer in Daniel Suarez's talent. That's not a particularly inspiring run, though. Chris Buescher in 18th. Now, this is where we're going the other way, where top 20s consistently for JTG Doherty Racing. That is a step forward for that team. Jimmy Johnson 19th. We already talked about him. Austin Dillon 20th. At this point, we're down into lap down cars. He went a lap down with that penalty and was never able to recover. Although it was interesting with the amount of speed that the Richard Childress cars, the 3 of Austin Dillon, the 8 of Daniel Hemrick, showed in practice and qualifying, that did not translate to the race. And that was why I was cautioning in my preview to maybe stay away from these guys in fantasy and take a wait-and-see approach, especially in the cash games where position differential plays into it. There was a relatively limited upside and a large amount of risk, and what ended up happening is if you had Austin Dillon and Daniel Hemrick on your teams, they finished 20th and 23rd after starting in 4th and 5th. That blew a hole in your lineup. Matt DiBenedetto, 21st after starting in 26th. Not particularly exciting, although there are some noteworthy teams. There are a couple noteworthy drivers that he was able to beat, namely Ryan Blaney in the 12, next behind him, 22nd. Interesting that the speed that the 22 and the 2 are showing doesn't seem to be translating to the 12. The Ryan Blaney really struggled today, and it was a little bit odd. Daniel Hemrick, 23rd, 2 laps down. Ryan Newman, 24th. Again, Stenhouse was up front all day. Ryan Newman was never really able to move up. You had a few of the guys that started in the back who are truly in superior equipment. So that would be the likes of Brad Keselowski, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch got back there, and Martin Truex Jr. So you had some guys who were, and Eric Almirola also was able to drive over the course of the race, was able to go from the back to the front, or into the top 10. But unless you have either a really exceptional driver or really exceptional equipment, it does seem to be very, very difficult to work through the field. And a lot of guys that started in the back, Ryan Newman, I think, is an example of that, kind of got stuck. So I don't know that Stenhouse had super superior equipment, but he was able to, it looked like through some pretty aggressive moves, he was able to stay up front, and he actually was making some passes late. That 17 looked good in comparison to the competition. Ryan Preece, 25th. Not great, but again, that car with AJ Allmendinger wasn't really competing for top 10s and top 5s anyway. 25th is a little bit disappointing for him, but Not a great run, not a terrible run. Bubba Wallace 26th. Like I said, until that team shows me something else, when he's starting as high as 21st place, I'm going to look elsewhere. I think he's an interesting play when he's starting outside of the top 30 because you might be able to get some positive position differential there. But that team, it's just not hitting on all cylinders right now. Corey LaJoie 27th, David Reagan 28th after starting 6th. That is an extremely disappointing performance for both of the front row motorsports cars. The 38 of David Reagan and then the 34 of Michael McDowell finishing 30th. Ty Dillon 29th after starting 14th. Again, some of those teams that were they're way down there, they are able to work the draft into a good starting spot, but once the green flag fell and the race was underway, they did fall back. Parker Kligerman, 31st. Landon Castle, 32nd. Ross Chastain, 33rd. Matt Tiff, 34th. Cody Ware, 35th. Reed Sorensen, 36th. BJ McLeod, 37th. And Joey Gase did 10 laps and parked at 38th place. Engine lost on that car. So one DNF due to an engine. That was Joey Gase. BJ McLeod also finished many laps off the pace. So he completed 220 of the 267 laps. There were no incidents. There was only the one engine failure. I'm not saying that every race needs to have a ton of engine failures or a ton of wrecks, but you need some of that every once in a while to demonstrate how that what these drivers are doing is a difficult thing to do. And we didn't see that today, and I think that that's what's missing. And I know that I saw some. It's like NASCAR fans will never be happy when you give them passing. Then they're going to complain that there's not enough passing. They're complain there's not enough passing. Look, I think what it is actually is that NASCAR fans are a lot smarter than, at least when it comes to being students of their sport, than a lot of people give them credit for. I do think that there are different groups of fans that complain at different times, so it's not always the same fans complaining each time. I'm not a big fan of this package. It's the long and short of it, and today didn't change my mind on that at all. Today looked about like what I expected it to be, and I was not particularly impressed. But we will see how it goes. I know that there are some in the NASCAR media that are absolutely committed to cheerleading and promoting the sport and the decisions made by the higher-ups in the sport, no matter what those decisions are. And so some of them may actually, it may be their honest and sincere opinion that they like this style of racing better. I don't. So that's the end of it. Real quick on the fantasy front, just because I want to talk a little bit about, we talked a little bit about it, but the Childress cars that I said were a good play in NASCAR Fantasy Live ended up not being a great play. That's the risk that you take. Let's see. The JTG Doherty cars were not a particularly great call. They were definitely better ones. Stenhouse ended up performing better than I expected. The Penske cars, if they keep running like that and continue to be priced where they are, the Penske cars are going to be a value play for at least a couple weeks, it looks like. So keep that in mind, that Penske really seems to be on it. Kurt Busch also in that number 1 Ganassi car is really impressive. That was a good pick. And in general, there's a lot of value to be found when you're looking deeper down the order. Martin Truex Jr. was a big point scorer. That was one of the ones that I got right. Ryan Newman sort of did okay. He got you some decent value, but not a great amount. On the FanDuel side, the guys that lineup that I ended up assembling, where I took all guys who were starting outside of the top 20, which was Eric Almirola, Daniel Suarez, Ryan Newman, Kurt Busch, Martin Truex Jr. That lineup as a whole, especially in the FanDuel format, actually did all right because all of those guys uh, finished higher than where they started, so you got some positive position differential points out of them. You also got, I think, some fast laps out of some of the guys who are. Let's see. Yeah, you got a few laps let out of Kurt Busch. A few laps let out of Daniel Suarez, interestingly, because of the different pit strategies. So that lineup actually ended up working out all right. Yeah, so that's kind of it. Next week, I think we're at Phoenix, so that at least is going to be more of a short track style race. That should provide some racing where the driver input does matter more. That's definitely a driver's track, so we'll see how that goes next week. Appreciate you guys watching. If you like this video, click that like button. I am curious to know what your thoughts are, your comments. I know, yeah, this video was pretty low energy, and I apologize for that, but that race didn't have me getting out of my seat. You know, it takes more than just side-by-side racing to get me out of my seat. You need it's side-by-side racing where you've got guys who really look like they're on the edge of control. And that I didn't see. The finish was, you know, it was cool seeing that Brad Keselowski was able to run down Logano and take a shot at him, and he missed. Anyway, yeah, so if you like this video, click the like button. If you don't like it, click the dislike button. If you have thoughts and comments, please do leave them down below. I am going to get some practice done and get ready for the Podium Esports Truck Series. I go live for that in, you know, once this video is uploaded, it'll be less than half hour from when I go live for that for practice. Practice is at 9 p.m. Eastern. The race is at 9:40 p.m. Eastern. Twitch.tv/John_A_Theodore to watch that, and then it's on the Podium Esports Twitch channel will be the TV style broadcast. So thank you guys very much for watching this. I hope you continue to like and check out my content. Leave feedback on how you'd like to see me improvement, or if you think that I'm just completely missing it or completely wrong, let me know why. Or if you agree with me, say that. That's what the comment section is for. Thank you guys. Peace out.